Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'm yet another person who's speaking out against this chaos we've been calling the Trump regime. But I hope you will take the time to listen, and hopefully the truth will reach those who need to hear it. We have seen by now, I hope, how Trump and his administration has used Christianity to manipulate believers into accepting a cruel and dehumanizing agenda by saying it is God ordained. This is not true, and it's actually an assault on our Christianity. It has corrupted our faith and caused many to walk away from it. A while ago, I posted a plea for all Christians to reflect and repent, to become part of the confessing church, in the same way that Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the confessing church in Germany unified to oppose the pro-Nazi evangelical movement in 1933. I wrote that when Elon Musk's first target was to dismantle USAID. USAID was not only America's soft power that helped maintain peace around the world with generosity. I found it to be an obvious and cruel attack against Christian organizations dedicated to humanitarian work. Many nonprofit Christian organizations like Catholic Relief Services, World Vision, and World Relief lost government support and funding. And certain Christians, the ones who voted for Trump especially, were indifferent to the harm it caused. For Trump and his administration, our acceptance of this was a test. How disconnected and indifferent were we to their true agenda? And it wasn't just a test. It was also a way to build calluses and help us grow numb to the moral decay that has been happening as it intensifies. None of this is holy. None of this is a mandate. God did not save Trump for this. Is this what America really wants? This madness? This cruelty? This apathy? Before I continue, let me start with who I am, okay? I'm a Gen Xer who grew up in the suburbs of Wisconsin. My dad was a music teacher at an all-boys high school, and my mom was an Italian immigrant who stayed at home to take care of the kids, because that's what you did back then. I went to public school, and it was a good public school. After school and practicing the piano, I would run around outside and play until the streetlights came on. It was safe. It was community. It was the American ideal. I grew up Catholic, and I went to church every Sunday. I went to CCD, Sunday school, and I was confirmed. In 1986, I went to Syracuse University and became best friends with a Puerto Rican who grew up in New York City as a Pentecostal evangelical Christian. Whew, we were so different. American, but culturally, religiously, and economically from different worlds. But I loved it. She still is, an amazing person. Before going to Syracuse, I knew the basics of the civil rights movement and the Holocaust. And by that, I mean I watched Eyes on the Prize, which was a PBS documentary at the time. And in 5th grade, I saw a documentary on the Holocaust. In 5th grade, and that was pretty traumatic. I still remember to this day, we saw the camps being revealed and the dead people being plowed into these massive graves. It was pretty graphic and eye-opening. Some people might say that was too young, but I don't think so. But it really wasn't until my Syracuse experience where I learned the deep-rooted truth of our historical past. And it was essentially because I met people who were outside of my cultural upbringing. Also at that time, there was a big political shift in South Africa as apartheid was being dismantled. And we didn't hear about that in Wisconsin. There were protests and product boycotts that were going on at the university. And I learned a lot about social justice and fighting for the rights of the oppressed. And I loved it. I felt part of something. My heart was captured. Looking back at this, I wonder, why was this experience so inspiring to me? I think it was because in grade school and in high school, as great as my neighborhood was, I really never felt like I belonged. I felt alone, bullied, picked on, inadequate, and rejected. Here in Syracuse, I was meeting and hanging out with Black and Latino people, Christians, people who believed in a strong moral code and helping others. And really, for the first time in my life, I felt accepted, loved, and purposed. So I became what we call back then a born-again Christian. I will share more of my story, but this is where I'm going to start, because we are at a critical time in America, and we, as believers, we have to organize and unify quickly. This is not just an attack on our democracy. This is destroying our communities and invalidating our faith. In this next section, I'm going to explain the 3 reasons why I am doing this today. My first why is that there is an enemy within, and it's not the immigrants. I began to notice something in 1990 when I moved back to Wisconsin after college. I was now a born-again Christian going to a non-denominational church. When I would talk about social issues with my family, they would get more and more agitated by and offended by the Democratic Party and their policies, convinced that they were a bunch of corrupt, evil leftists. They were communists, they were Marxists, and they were attacking our Christian faith and our religious freedoms, and they were giving tax money to the welfare deadbeats. The Democrats were promoting sexual immorality, abortion, and homosexuality, and our country was being destroyed because of them. And it was the Republican Party that was the family values party. They had the good morals and strong convictions. Republicans were hardworking, honest Americans. America was supposed to be a city on a hill, and Reagan was the hero, and he could do no wrong. When I would confront them, I was never really talking about politics. I was actually objecting more about where they were placing the blame for this corruption in our society. It was always the poor and the marginalized that were the problem. They just weren't trying hard enough. It was their fault that they were in the situation that they were in. And it was the Democrats who were radical and immoral and just giving handouts to these people. But my friends in college, my Black and Latino friends, some of them who grew up poor in New York City, they weren't immoral. They were actually good, hardworking people. My friend, the Puerto Rican, she worked hard to get a scholarship to go to Syracuse University. And then with that scholarship, she dedicated her life to helping kids with special needs. That kind of thing was just inspiring to me. Yeah, they were not immoral. They were hardworking people. They were Bible-believing Christians, fighting for justice, loving those who they might not even agree with, embracing the lost and the brokenhearted. My college friends were not commie-loving, depraved lefties. So I kind of didn't know where this disconnection was. Why was my family and friends in Wisconsin so angry? I mean, they really didn't even interact with poor people or with Black and Latino people. Milwaukee is one of the most segregated cities in the country. So at first, I thought this was coming from a lack of knowledge regarding the deep-rooted oppression and racism that exists in America. After going to college and taking just a very simple Black History 101 course, literally that was the name, Black History 101, I found out how much more I didn't learn in elementary school about our American historical past. At home, they would say things like, God helps those who help themselves, assuming that the majority of the poor weren't even trying. I felt like this was just a rush to judgment without even knowing the circumstances. And as callous as that sounds, I know that It's coming actually from something way more sinister: bad history and bad theology.
Christian nationalism is, in my own definition, the unholy alliance of bad history and bad theology. There is a very well organized, very well financed effort underway in this country right now where people are attempting to piece together this persuasive case to be made that actually we are a Christian nation. You just haven't realized it until now. And now is the time to reclaim our rightful heritage. The problem with this is that once you are to that place where you're willing and able to rewrite history and kind of manipulate and pervert and distort history, well then, pretty quickly, you're going to start doing the same to Scripture.
I'm talking about what people are calling these days Christian nationalism, also known as Kingdom Now theology or Dominionism. As I understand, the foundation of this form of Christianity, for the most part, comes from a distorted, extreme interpretation of kingdom theology and Genesis 1:28. I'm not talking about a Christian who is proud of being American. I'm proud of being an American. But there's a distinct American Christian nationalist movement that has become a political iteration of Christianity. And we see that really obviously right now. It has co-opted the word Christian, and it abuses the Bible and Bible prophecy to justify a theocracy in America. It's destroying our faith and our credibility as followers in Christ. It has infected our democracy and our politics. And if we don't become proactive, it will destroy our country as we know it.
We shouldn't be precious about Christianity. Christianity gave us the Crusades. Christianity has given us Christian imperialism. Christianity backstopped and justified colonialism. Christianity has been used in many ways to create modern racism. And so I think we need to not pretend that Christianity has some intrinsic quality to it that resists fascism.
And you're saying that as a Christian.
I am a Christian.
Right, me too.
I have a seminary degree.
Clear, I am Jesus people.
I go to church on a weekly basis.
Right,
I worship Jesus.
Yes.
I don't cross my fingers when I say the creeds.
Exactly. You're all in.
But Christianity is a human tradition.
Yeah.
Jesus was not walking around first century Galilee saying, I'm starting a tradition called Christianity that will be a global movement that will take over the world.
The scary thing is that it is very hard to pinpoint where the truth has become distorted and who really believes it and who is just using our faith for their own personal gain. It sounds like Christianity, it looks like Christianity, and now there are Catholics, Baptists, Black, White, and Latino communities, charismatic and spirit-filled churches, Pentecostals, and evangelicals who believe aspects of this movement because it uses Christian words and phrases and concepts to push its political agenda. And it distorts biblical principles, stories, and prophecies, and then calls this interpretation the inerrant word of God.
I'm coming to you as a prophet, as a man of God, and I'm telling you, it's time to pray for the president. But here's what the Holy Spirit said to me last night, and here's what he said for me to tell you. Oh my God, there's going to be an attempt to take him out of power. Let's stand and pray right now. Come on, help me out right now. I want you to lift your voice. Everybody, help me pray. Keep him, Holy Spirit.
Christian support for Trump had an extra degree of fanaticism to it that much of the mainstream media just missed completely. And that fanaticism was supplied by prophecy.
Somebody had to do it. I am the chosen one.
I said, Mr. President, I know there are people that say, you know, you said you were the chosen one. And I said, you were.
It has played on the fear of end times with prophetic proclamations from so-called apostles and celebrity Christian leaders that are now in this movement and running our country. Christian nationalism or dominionism has created anger, fear, and distrust, and has deceived fellow Christians into justifying the demonization of other human beings.
In previous videos, I've highlighted how MAGA Republicans have embraced core elements of fascism. The combination of fascism and Christian nationalism is called Christofascism, a term first used half a century ago by the theologian Dorothy Zola. Fascists rise to power by characterizing their opponents as subhuman. Christofascists take it a step further by casting opponents as not just subhuman, but actually demonic.
People like Nancy Pelosi, she's a demon.
Framing opponents as enemies of God makes violence against them not only seem justifiable, but divinely sanctioned and almost inevitable.
We are going to put on the armor of God. And maybe strap on a Glock on the side of us just in case.
When we take power, they need to be given the death penalty. And these people that are suppressing the name Christ and suppressing Christianity, they must be absolutely annihilated when we take power.
There are Christian leaders, churches and organizations, media, streaming channels and books, and they've all been teaching aspects of this either knowingly or unknowingly. And over the years and years of distortion, before you know it, it's like lymphatic cancer, and it has consumed the body. The second reason why I want to do this is because there's motivated ignorance in this country. You might know that some of the things that are being told to you are, a little bit off.
The ability that each of us has, but it seems to be more on display right now in one space than others. But the ability to just filter out the things that make you uncomfortable, and really those then are not part of your reality. This motivated ignorance, like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about, or I haven't been paying attention, or I don't. And it's just like, how can you break into that? Because for me, what's important to me is certainly the results of the election, but also a baseline of integrity, that if this is what you are choosing, I at least want people to own it, to own up, look it in the face and say, yes, all of this is what I am choosing. And I think that is what we owe each other.
I'm going to show you how this has been a project and an agenda 60 years in the making. It started with oil barons who partnered with televangelists in the 70s and 80s. And today, it is a huge network that has corporatized Christianity, and they are using our deep-rooted beliefs to gain political power. And we are complacent. We are fine with it. We want a Christian America. We've been okay with not taking ownership of the damage it has caused to the teachings of Jesus Christ as long as our way of life is not in danger. And the evil one knows this about us. Ignorance is bliss.
Let me ask you a question. You think a lot of the stuff that Trump is doing now is to quiet that? Is we possibly gonna give you guys $5,000
as a distraction.
We're possibly gonna take the congestion prices, say hello to the king. You think he's doing those things to say, you know what? All the rest of that stuff, these people won't even check me because they think I'm doing this.
That's exactly right. He knows that they're not going to check him, right? Like, I mean, you can go back and play the clips of him talking about how he loves the uneducated, right? If he would ever run for president, he would run as a Republican. Like, and we know, like, this isn't me trying to throw shade. These are just the facts. Mm-hmm. When you look at who's voting for who, the less educated folk, and when I say educated, I'm not even talking about formal education. I'm talking about people that literally don't want to read and enlighten themselves on facts. Mm-hmm. Those are the people that typically vote for the Republicans, and it's one of the reasons that we have to stop writing in theses as Democrats, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we want to give you every single little detail that we can find so that you can have all the information. But the reality is that the average person that is going out there and voting, they're not paying attention to that. And we fail to realize how selfish people are. Mm-hmm. People go out and they vote in their own self-interest, right?
This is about the wool being thrown over our eyes and us letting them do it. Trump is a con man, an elitist, a bully, and he treats people so very anti-Christian. Even more disgusting is that he and his administration use Christianity to secure a voting bloc, and they say it out loud. And yet many Christians have convinced themselves that it is better to choose policy over character to justify voting for him. It has ruined our reputation as believers. Thirdly, we need to be a confessing church. It couldn't be any more obvious now. We have to call out the heresy, to speak up against the lies, and return to the original message of Jesus. Because of our complacency, the Dark Enlightenment, or NRX, has actually taken our religious Christian truths and twisted it to their agenda. It's no longer the Reagan Republican Party. It is the party of Christo-fascism. Now, I'm not saying that we should demonize Trump or the people that voted for him. However, what he is doing is evil and anti-Christian. His policies have proven to be anti-Christian. And here's a list of just a few. Retribution against your enemies. Isolation from the rest of the world. Erasing crucial parts of American history on government websites. That's the same as book banning. Taking joy in dismantling DEI and all other forms of civil rights. Forcing organizations to be compliant or bend the knee with lawsuits and other forms of threat. Destroying valuable government institutions that help with educational and scientific advancements. Denying free speech to those who disagree with you. Dehumanizing and terrifying immigrants. And then propagandizing all of this for personal pleasure? I think we need to call out these modern-day false prophets that surround him and their false teachings. They use God's name in vain and for their own selfish motives. Christians have given them permission by staying silent. And by Christians, I mean we, the church, the body of Christ. We have allowed the anger and fear and oppression to spread. We're even taking part of it, some of us. Let's turn our direction back to Jesus Christ and his upside-down kingdom. We are called to be the light of the world. We are supposed to fight for hope and peace, love and joy.
Trump supporters are increasingly overt in their calls to replace democracy with a MAGA theocracy.
The church is supposed to direct the government, and I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk.
We're meant to be a Christian nation. We should be a Christian nation.
Welcome to the end of democracy. We're here to overthrow it completely. We didn't get all the way there on January 6th, but we will endeavor to get rid of it and replace it with this right here.
That was a cross he was holding. The idea that the will of voters is irrelevant because God has anointed Trump was a recurring message in the efforts to overturn the 2020 election.
Through the Christian nationalist movement, the state has co-opted the church in the same way that the Nazis sought to create a national Reich church. I don't speak German. Reich Church.
Led by Ludwig Müller, who was appointed the Reich Bishop of Germany. The Reich churches were allowed to continue giving services as long as the pastors supported the Nazis, and some went as far as to display the swastika in church.
Even back in the time of Christ, the Jewish people believed their Messiah was going to take over the kingdom. They were looking for a political movement too. But Jesus made it very clear that that was not his mission. His kingdom is in the heart of his followers. And in his kingdom, the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. So yes, we have an enemy within, but we don't see it because we have motivated ignorance, and we need to be a confessing church.
It's very easy to see this as something that is outside of government. It's not in power. That could all change very quickly.
Our definition of what would never happen keeps getting pushed out into more extreme places.
The thing that keeps me up at night is that we lose democracy and that this country slides into a theocratic nation.
Does that seem possible?
Yes. It's possible. It's absolutely possible. We're closer to it now than we ever have been before. America is on a precipice, and I personally don't know if we're going to stop ourselves from going over the other side.
There are many voices in the wilderness who have been warning us for over a decade about Donald Trump and the Dominionist movement that supports him. I just referenced a few in the clips I just showed, and I will be sharing more voices that are speaking out. I'm not an expert like these folks. I'm just a girl who was picked last in the schoolyard. I want anybody who will listen to hear this. But primarily, this is an appeal to my fellow Christians, especially the 80% of white evangelicals and 60% of white Catholics and Pentecostals that voted for Trump. This is also an appeal to some of the men in this group who have been spiritually and emotionally hijacked into believing that they are being replaced or thought of as toxic.
And honestly, that's why I keep telling white people, you got to take some of these arrows. Like it's not on black women. It's not on, it's not on those people to take care of this shit. Like we have to own it, especially people who helped, again, ignorantly, but still were complicit in making some of the sausage, right? Like regardless of how we think about our childhood, the good and the bad, the complicated nature of a lot of the stuff that we grew up in, the reality is that, and I say this often, and this is just a data point, without white Protestant, Catholics, and evangelicals, Trump never happens. Even this election. I know he gained ground with some other minority voices, Latino men, black men, but it still doesn't offset the white Christian vote in this country. And without that white Christian vote being so starkly in the tank for Trump, that never happens. And so we absolutely have an obligation. It's about standing in solidarity and learning from and learning with, and then being willing when necessary to put your white ass body in the line of fire, because it's on you to fix. The trolls should be coming after me. They shouldn't be coming after you, Janice, or anyone else, right? It should be on me to say, no, I'm going to call out Christian nationalism. I'm going to go after people on Twitter. I'm going to make the content consistently because I want those flies to hit this light. I think that's a huge obligation, especially I think that white men have in these next four or so years. We need white men to really own this and step up and say, absolutely not. Channel some of that alpha maleness and put it towards good use, I'm not going to take this stuff lying down. I'm just not. It's absolutely ridiculous.
The goal of Christian nationalism is not Jesus Christ. To be clear, I am not calling every white evangelical or Catholic who voted for Trump a Christian nationalist. But because it has had such a powerful voice for decades, not just coming from politicians, but from pastors and priests, it has been seeded inside of American Christianity to the point that you might not even realize how ingrained it is in what you believe. With this series, I want to show you where the bad theology began, how it distorted things, and why so many people are speaking out against the damage it has caused, not just in America, but in Christianity. Maybe the chaos in these first 3 months have made you depressed or anxious or zoned out. The worst thing you can be is zoned out. And maybe you're thinking, you know what? Everything is going to be fine. God is in control. And I'm just being hyperbolic. First of all, I want to acknowledge God is in control. That is true. But when Jesus sent his disciples out to spread the good news, he did not tell us to go out there with a wrecking ball or a chainsaw. I believe this is spiritual warfare. And it's not about being Republican or Democrat. It's not about the war between the religious right and the radical left. It's a war between fear and hope, between anger and love. And God is on the side of love. Yes, he will win. Love will win. But right now, Christians are listening to the voices of fear, anger, and hate. We just let the devil distort our faith and hijack our government. And by devil, I don't mean Trump or Elon. I mean evil. Americans are splintered and divided. Dehumanizing and demonizing people have become an accepted part of the plan. I want to shed light on this misinformation so that we can reach out to those who are primarily deceived by the very demonic forces they think they're fighting against. This is our new mission field as Christians. It's not an easy one. You will be, like John, a voice in the wilderness. So here's a breakdown of the first few episodes in this series. First, I will talk about this particular wave of dominionism that began in 1981 by highly funded conservative organizations that took over the Republican Party. Next, I will explain what dominionism is and how this neo-reactionary movement found a home in Pentecostalism and in the New Apostolic Reformation, which is a highly spiritual and emotional Christian practice. With its affinity to celebrity culture, it has made Trump their wrecking ball messiah. Thirdly, let's talk about Musk and the PayPal mafia and their non-religious, if you want to call it that, philosophy of venture capitalism. It has intermingled with Christian Dominionism, and that's the new right regime that is attempting to establish a techno-monarchy.
Lovers, they may cause you tears. Go ahead, release your fears. Stand up and be counted, don't be ashamed.
I'd like to be clear about something before I get into this next section. It may seem like I'm only blaming the Republican Party or Christians who voted for Trump for our country heading towards this illiberal democracy. That's not my point. I do believe the Democrats have failed in a different way, and that requires its own analysis. However, my focus right now is on the crisis in American Christianity today and how it's brought us to this verge of autocracy, dominionism, the theory or doctrine that Christians have a divine mandate to assume positions of power and influence over all aspects of society and government, and the belief that humans have the right to exercise control over this natural world. Dominionism, very simply, is the self-righteous idea that America is a Christian nation and must be a theocracy. The dominionist ideology has destroyed our politics and intercepted the Republican Party, turning it into a neo-reactionary party, and its plan is to destroy democracy. I'm going to start with recent history, a few key points in the not-too-distant past that has a direct result in terms of what has happened, what is happening, and what is going to happen. There's a book actually out there. I wonder if it's banned actually at this point. It's called Lies My History Teacher Told Me, something like that. Anyway, it's basically about the whitewashing of American history, and it's what I grew up with. Enough of the truth to tell you what has happened, but not enough to tell you why we have such a divide. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that racial segregation of children in public schools was unconstitutional. I think we know this. This is common knowledge, basic fact. Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. As a result, segregated public schools had to integrate, and segregated Christian universities would lose their tax-exempt status if they refused. Segregation was an offense to white Christians. An offense. The Black Christian church and denominations stemmed from white Christian churches not welcoming or allowing Black Christians to worship with them. This was 1954. Everything was segregated. Schools, pools, diners, churches, theaters, bathrooms, everything. This was 90 years after the Emancipation Proclamation and failed Reconstruction period, which means things were stagnant for 90 years. Now, before you say that this was just the southern states, think again. Just because there were no Jim Crow laws in the North didn't mean that there was not biased segregation. Certain communities were afforded more government funding depending on where they lived and who lived there. We know now loan opportunities and property ownership was racially selective. Suburbs were made for white people, veterans who came back after the war, but only the white veterans. With segregation, Black Americans were promised separate but equal, and it was anything but equal.
So there's always been this idea that, like, I think a lot of people think, well, racism was solved because now we're all together. Now the Black people get to be with us, and that's what they wanted. And that's not what the Black people wanted. The Black people wanted the equal. The separate could have been fine, because it was never us saying white people can't come over here, right? It was white people saying you can't come over here. And we were fine. We would be fine now. And if we had our own communities and if white people wanted to come over here, like great. But it's always been about, we don't want to give them anything. So the only reason we wanted to be together, right, was because you do have the resources and you're not giving them to us.
Another reason why I start with school integration is because this was not a Democratic or Republican Party position, per se. There were racists on both sides of the aisle. The partisan politics we experience today did not happen back then. As a matter of fact, both parties had progressive and conservative coalitions, and they would actually work together across the aisle. Can you imagine? Not perfect, but way better than what we got now.
Though today this seems hard to believe, there used to be conservative and progressive wings of both parties. In the Democratic Party, the progressives were northern urban Democrats. The conservatives were the Southerners, which, of course, included these guys. In the Republican Party, the progressives were folks like the liberally minded Rockefeller family. For years, to be a progressive Republican was to be a Rockefeller Republican. The conservative wing was made up of those who wanted the federal government to stay small and stay out of their business. Both conservative Northern Republicans and conservative Southern Democrats opposed the federal government getting bigger and launching more programs. So from the early days of Roosevelt's New Deal right up through the 1960s, a coalition of conservative Republicans and conservative Democrats managed to block just about every attempt at new civil rights legislation. In fact, between 1953 and 1965, more than 120 civil rights measures were considered by the Senate. Almost every one was killed by the Senate Judiciary Committee, a powerful committee at the time controlled by Southern Democrats and conservative Northern Republicans.
It took 16 years, the civil rights movement, the assassination of JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X before any action was truly taken against the segregated schools and their so-called religious freedom. In 1970, Nixon ordered the IRS to enact a new policy denying tax-exempt status to any university that did not integrate. The Moral Majority Incorporated.
At the end of a long campaign, I believe I know our people of this state as well as anyone could. Based on this knowledge of Georgians, North and South, rural and urban, liberal and conservative, I say to you quite frankly that the time for racial discrimination is over.
In 1974, Jimmy Carter becomes president, a born-again evangelical from the South. Sounds perfect, right? But because of these words, the time for racial segregation is over. Segregationists with Christian universities and Southern white preachers like Jerry Falwell blamed Jimmy Carter for the IRS regulations against their schools. Jerry Falwell was a fundamentalist evangelical. This is important to know for this part of the story because fundamentalists believe in the inerrant word of God. They have a separatism philosophy from society, and they rejected liberal and scientific thought, which means they opposed Darwinism and rejected the theory of evolution. They stayed within their own church and church culture and their communities there for any kind of validation. In other words, tribalism. They also adhere to the bad interpretation of Genesis 1:28 as humans having dominion over all things on earth. I also found it notable that billionaire Lyman Stewart, the co-founder of Union Oil, helped publish The Fundamentals in the early 1900s. This collection of essays is considered to be the basis of American fundamentalism. The reason why I bring up that Lyman Stewart is a billionaire is because we're talking about Christian elites, people with money. It was not just your regular Joe Christian.
Newsweek magazine declared 1976 the year of the evangelical. The media needed a handle for all these conservative white Christians who were suddenly shaping national politics, and almost no one was claiming to be a fundamentalist anymore. When it came to politics, we were all evangelicals. And suddenly, the three strands of white Protestant Christianity in America collapsed back into two: mainline Protestants and everyone else who wasn't black. And everyone else who wasn't black was now an evangelical.
Jerry Falwell was very outspoken politically, against integration, and was opposed to the civil rights movement. He even started his own segregated Christian academy in 1971. Which we now know as Liberty University. He defended school integration as religious freedom. It was not a pretty time. White Christians were protesting, pulling their kids out of public school and homeschooling them. Jerry Falwell said once, "I hope to see the day when, as in the early days of our country, we don't have public schools. The churches will have taken them over again, and Christians will be running them." I think it's important to note that in January of 2016, Jerry Falwell Jr., his son, was one of the first of the Christian elites in 2016 to endorse Donald Trump, even though most evangelical leaders at that time were repelled by Trump. Trump also spoke at Liberty University that year. And we have come to learn that this was actually a transactional agreement after Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, helped Falwell bury some compromising photos. Being a kid at that time, I remember two things, actually, that I find now to be untrue. First, that Christianity was being attacked because prayer in public schools was banned. What was actually prohibited was teachers forcing all the kids to recite prayer out loud and in unison. That was what was banned. You could still pray, and it wasn't banned, it was prohibited, which means the teacher couldn't do something. And to be quite honest with you, I think that's actually kind of important. Secondly, is this mark of Cain that I remember as a kid. Now, maybe because you didn't grow up Christian or whatever, you didn't hear of this before. What it meant was that as a black person, you were cursed, and that's why your ancestors were enslaved. Now, I have no idea where I heard that, and it really never made any sense to me. But yet it was out there. I want you to know that this is what propaganda looked like. I even asked one of the people who told me about that to show me where it was in the Bible. And it's still, I looked at it and I was like, why? Because all it says is mark of Cain. It doesn't say it's because of skin color or where you're from. It was just some person's interpretation that spread. So back to 1979. Along comes Republican strategist and Catholic zealot named Paul Weyrich. He was a very influential extreme right activist at the time. As a matter of fact, he's the one in 1973 who co-founded the Heritage Foundation. As we know, the people behind Project 2025. That, to me, explained so much as to why we see what we're seeing today. With white Christians protesting the integration of schools, he saw an opportunity. He partnered with Jerry Falwell to establish a political organization called the Moral Majority Incorporated to rally up an otherwise silent voting bloc, the white Christian evangelicals. Remember I told you about how fundamentalists actually separated themselves from society? They really didn't vote all that much. They stayed out of everything political. The agenda was to oust Jimmy Carter, who they blamed for the tax laws, even though it was Nixon who enforced it. Also joining Falwell in the Moral Majority Incorporated were people like televangelist Pat Robertson and Tim LaHaye. Tim LaHaye co-authored the Left Behind apocalyptic fictional books that have influenced the modern-day idea of end times or the rapture. By the way, the rapture does not exist in the Bible. So the common idea of American Christianity that we are going to experience a rapture is false. This was the start of the political religious right, which has become the new right that we see today, the origins of the MAGA political movement in America. Make no mistake about the Moral Majority. It was a lobbying group meant to coalesce a voting bloc. And the idea of unifying over racial segregation was not going to hold most people's sense of decency. There were standards, after all, right? So Paul Weyrich chose abortion as the rallying cry, not for moral reasons, but because it could electrically charge people's emotions. By the way, Roe versus Wade already legalized abortion in 1973. That's 6 years prior to the Moral Majority Incorporated. Also at this time, evangelicals considered it more of a Catholic issue, but it gave people something worth fighting for, saving the unborn child.
The Republican Party had become the party of white, Christian, conservative America. And the Democratic Party was now the party of radical progressive leftists and hippies. Oh, and black church ladies. Right.
The Moral Majority became one of the largest conservative lobbying groups in 1979. Later, Paul Weyrich would write, "When political power is achieved, the moral majority will have the opportunity to recreate this great nation." His ultimate goal was always a theocracy.
Little thinking that I would understand that demonization and the whole pro-life movement were the result of a business deal between a televangelist and the Republican Party strategist of 1980 to get Reagan elected. When people see the film, it connects the dots and it helps them understand a little bit about the situation we're in now.
The new traditionalist movement. In 1980, Weyrich's strategy was a success. By making Jimmy Carter the fall guy, Ronald Reagan won, sealing the deal for Republicans to own the religious right as part of their brand. The manipulation of where to place moral judgment began. Republicans were the party of God and the party of the Christians, and Democrats were the communists, the socialists, the feminists, the sexually immoral, the America haters, and now the baby killers. Oh, and the majority of black Christians, as Phil Vischer says.
The evangelicals did not believe in the political arena. They were not voting. They did not vote. So Weyrich told their leaders, tell them that the Republican Party is the party of God and that the Democratic Party is the party of the devil. And then they'll vote the right way.
In 1981, Reagan nominated the first woman to serve in the Supreme Court. Pretty cool, huh? Sandra Day O'Connor. And she was pro-choice. So Weyrich didn't like that.
She's not only pro-abortion, she was also alleged to be an active feminist.
The White House people who were sent here, they ran against Washington to get elected, but they have now been co-opted by Washington. I'm not the kind of conservative that says preserve the status quo, because I think the status quo in large measure is awful. Rather, let us change the premises upon which we're operating.
That actually set him back in his goals, but he pressed forward, this time co-founding the Council of National Policy. The Council of National Policy is an extremely secretive and highly funded umbrella organization and networking group. It was started by 5 men, Tim LaHaye, Weyrich, and 3 oil baron elites. The organization has grown to include hundreds of the most powerful, conservative activists and billionaires looking to influence policy and legislation, like deregulation and tax cuts and tariffs. So when you look at their website, it sounds like, pretty reasonable conservative organization. On the website, it says, a handful of men and women, individuals of character, had a vision to see the return of righteousness, justice, and truth to our great nation. In reality, 60 years ago, the CNP began a project intent on gaining power in order to run this country, along with the Heritage Foundation. It's more than a belief that America was just founded on Judeo-Christian values. That's just rhetoric. The plan is domination. They are in a war for the soul of America, and they plan on winning. Here's a quote by Paul Weyrich. The truth of an idea is not the primary reason for its acceptance. Far more important is the energy and dedication of the idea's promoters. In other words, the individuals composing a social or political movement.
In spite of all this nonsense from the left, we are going to win. We're in the process of taking this country back. We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
This group of evangelical Christians believed America was becoming more and more decrepit with the acceptance of feminism, homosexuality, and the integration of society in terms of busing kids, interracial marriage, and affirmative action. That type of thing. The liberal left hippie movement of peace, love, and joy was nothing but a vile cesspool of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. This group of Christian elites started this culture war as part of a political strategy that comes out of every fascist playbook. Propaganda, lies, and misinformation intent on making the enemy of others. Again, Paul Weyrich writes, it's a basic fact that an us versus them, inside versus outsider mentality is a very strong motivation in human life, for better or worse. This has to be recognized and taken advantage of for the good of the movement. We will be results-oriented rather than good intentions-oriented. We must learn to treat leftists as natural disasters or rabid dogs. Consequently, televangelists, trusted pastors, and church leaders like Falwell, Pat Robertson, and Tim LaHaye would apply this tactic and distort the message of the Bible and Jesus Christ by intentionally dehumanizing other human beings. Does this anger you? Because it angers me. We put our trust in these people who call themselves pastors and priests. They tell us that they have a message from God, and we trust them with our spiritual lives and with our souls. Some, especially the ones that we see on TV, have turned our beliefs political. Now they say anyone on the left, a progressive or a Democrat, is detestable, destroying this nation, and demonic. They are calling other human beings demonic. So whether it's using the Southern strategy to label working-class black women as welfare queens, or scaring people with Willie Horton, or using the murder of Lincoln Riley to deport Venezuelans without due process, the Republican Party fueled and continues to fuel this culture war by keeping it alive with hate and fear. In 2006, Paul Weyrich laid out his plan. He said, there will be 3 main stages in the unfolding of this movement. The first stage will be devoted to the development of highly motivated elites able to coordinate future activities. In the book, Money, Lies, and God, Katherine Stewart calls these people the funders. The second stage will be devoted to the development of institutions designed to make an impact on the wider elite and the relatively small minority of the masses. Again, from Katherine Stewart, she calls these people the power players.
Ralph Reed, one of Weyrich's key disciples, decided to step in.
Please join me in welcoming the presumptive Republican nominee for president, Donald J. Trump.
I believe that God's using him to destabilize these progressive institutions, the penetration of that progressive ideology in these places, so that believers and other viewpoints can go into them and establish credibility also.
Our mission is to champion the pastors of America for the transformation of America.
Leaders of the movement know that pastors drive votes, and so they draw pastors into networks such as Watchmen on the Wall, which is an initiative of the Family Research Council. It has tens of thousands of affiliated pastors.
President of the Family Research Council, Tony Perkins, was the president of the Council for National Policy. There is no error between them. And the Family Research Council publishes voter guides. They're called the iVoter Guides. They're allegedly nonpartisan, but you basically have the Democrat with their policies, which are things like Hillary Clinton supports the homosexual agenda, and Donald Trump supports American families. So choose one, right?
Guess what, ladies and gentlemen? This next Tuesday, you get the privilege to live out a biblical Christian worldview.
The third stage will involve changing the overall character of American popular culture.
Now you think of your average target voter, and you go back a few years ago, and Ralph Reed announced, we've got 17, 18 million evangelicals who don't vote. How do we corral them into voting our way? Well, you surround them.
Every one of those households is going to be contacted by this organization 7 to 12 times.
So if you're this person out in Missouri, this is all the information you're getting. Newspapers have been dying off. Local news is disappearing from thousands of counties in the middle of America. And what fills that vacuum? It's Fox and Sinclair, which function and sing in harmony. So you don't have the newspapers. Your broadcasting environment has changed. When you go online, it's not just that you've chosen a silo, you are a target for a multifaceted operation of tremendous sophistication.
They have successfully won over a evangelical Christian base, but you can see whether or not you believe or even follow, or even go to church, this is now seeping into, it's like a web. It just kind of grows and seeps into the rest of society before you know it. And you're believing things that you didn't know you believed. It starts in this core and then just ripples out and spreads into the community and into the culture. And that's what we have today. And our reality TV show host turned president continues to fuel the culture war by dismantling DEI, erasing Black history, and he mocks and trolls his enemies and dehumanizes immigrants to distract us from what he's really after: money and power.
You know, you're going to be persecuted. By who?
Right.
Because it's like this idea that the persecution is coming from the bottom, and it never, ever has. Like,
That's
you know,
good.
when Jesus is talking about, you know, the world will hate you the way it hates, who is he talking about? Jesus was a persecuted man. He wasn't talking about his neighbors, right? He wasn't talking about the people he was living in community with. It's always coming from the top. And so, like, again, dumbest time, I don't know how people don't see just the patterns we're repeating, the old stuff we're falling into. The government cannot be the arbiter of your relationship with God. The government cannot healthily have a religion and protect it. You just can't. And as soon as, like, this should have been, I can see you like working and Christian nationalists believe it and whatever, but like as soon as the power flips and you have it, you are in danger. You're supposed to be giving that up. That is red flags, warning lights. And the fact that people don't see it, that they are cheering for this, that's where I'm like, you're not, you don't know, you don't like the no true Scotsman and blah, blah. But at some point we have to say, like, we don't believe the same thing.
Yeah, right.
We don't.
For sure.
Definitely
not
not
on the
following
same
the
team.
teachings of Jesus. Like, Jesus never said, go into all the world and take over the government.
Yes.
Like he was
right.
he was very anti-power.
Not a thing.
And like
Yeah.
give up your power, give away your wealth. Like the opposite of what a Christian nationalist is.
To say that all white evangelicals are in a crazy cult, or that if you're proud to be Republican, you are therefore corrupt, that's not my point. My point is the corruption and twisting of the Christian ideology, making it so hard for Americans to open their eyes to the idea that their beliefs were actually manipulated. Progressives and Democrats do have their own set of moral failings, but I have not heard any Democrat in government twist our core beliefs and dehumanize people for power and control over them. Perhaps some of these men had what they thought were good intentions to rid the world of evil, but in their arrogance, they decided to take over where they thought God left off. They felt justified in their strategy for this power grab. Christianity has become a political tool used to manipulate hearts and minds. What makes bad theology so hard to discern is that it usually comes from a charismatic leader, and they are usually very inspiring, and they say they are speaking for God. Also, this rhetoric has been passed down within our culture for decades. During the 90s and early 2000s, a whole evangelical industrial complex of music, media, books, megachurches, and celebrity pastors exploded. The prosperity gospel became a thing. Let me be clear. The prosperity gospel is not the gospel. I can say that with confidence because it makes God transactional. It claims that if I tithe or be obedient to God, then he will give me more and more success and money. And I think most people think of God like that. If I just do good, then I will be blessed. But that is not the message of Jesus Christ. He did all the work for us. He does want us to be good. He does want us to prosper, but he wants us first to follow him in character. And it's up to us to do it. It's our choice, but we have to continually seek that relationship with him. In the Bible, Jesus made it very clear several times that our love for money is dangerous. He told the rich man to sell everything and follow him. Generosity is very hard for the rich man. A lot of false prophets come from this prosperity gospel mindset because their leader was more interested in growing the church and making money. Jesus said himself, "No one can serve two masters. Either you hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." And I think it's very clear right now, if you haven't seen, that the whole purpose of the Trump administration is to gain money, which means they're despising God. In the early 2000s, I loved going to church. My favorite part was praise and worship, because I love to sing. There were beautiful and inspiring sermons, encounters with the Holy Spirit. We would go to homeless shelters and talk to the people there and put food boxes together on Thanksgiving for the poor. Our church leaders went to Guatemala to build a school. Everything that I enjoyed about going to an evangelical church. It was all about community. It was all about going out there and making a difference. But just like all of humanity, church leaders aren't perfect. And they got too consumed in their position and in their power, making it very hard to even contradict them as fellow Christians. In his first run for presidency, Trump was already known to be a sexist playboy and bad businessman, filing for bankruptcy 6 times. Not to mention his racist business practice and opinions. Many Republicans were also trying to stop him, preferring Ted Cruz, who was another Christian nationalist in this movement. However, because Falwell Jr. endorsed, funded, and promoted him, Trump won the primary. So the power players and Christian elites made a deal with Trump. As a conman and faux business mogul, he was perfect for the task. He was established as a celebrity, and most people do not know how fake reality TV is. Even the name reality TV is propaganda that cements the lie. More and more pastors, sometimes pressured by their congregation, would say the choice was the Republican Party and Trump simply if the only issue was abortion. The lie was solidified.
But it spoke to how much American evangelicals had really abandoned our core principles and really made an exchange. We were now all about exercising political power.
There was such hostility in the campaign rhetoric and upcoming election, with Trump supporting Christians choosing the pro-life cause at any cost, and the opposed outcrying the hypocrisy of this morally reprehensible con man. This wild atmosphere caused family fights, friendships to be destroyed, people leaving church. There was a new phrase out there called deconstructing your faith and the ex-evangelical. Back then, and even more so now, people would say if you didn't vote Republican, then you weren't really a Christian. And really, that's just a spit in the face to the majority Black Christians who supported the Democratic Party.
White supremacy was never our problem. It was never ours to fix, but we tried. We tried for a long time. And now it really is on y'all. Like, y'all have to decide who am I aligned with? Which Christianity do I believe in? And am I willing to fight for?
Yeah.
Today, Trump and his administration continue to blatantly use Christian language and this mindset as he grabs more and more money and power. He takes pleasure in seeing the radical left suffer. It's all just a show for him. The Trump regime has sabotaged and manipulated words, events, history, and biblical references to diminish their value and mean the opposite of what they really stand for, subsequently destroying the truth. This is a standard tool for fascist leaders. The majority of Republicans and his cabinet and Congress are in line with this Christian nationalist grab for authoritarianism. Now, if you look at this chart, you'll see only 4 to 10% of the Christian population adheres to this political movement completely. It's the ideology that runs the Trump regime. The deceived are about 20 to 25% that in this chart are called the sympathizers. They believe the lies and propaganda and cannot see themselves voting outside of the Republican Party. 70% of the Christian population do not adhere to or are not sympathetic to Christian nationalism. And that's why it's important to speak up. A Christian theocracy goes against what Jesus taught us.
Being a Christian is about the values of inclusion, working for the needs of the marginalized, peace building. Christian nationalism is certainly not based on the values of the gospel.
Our ethos says love your enemies. Our ethos says bless those who persecute you. Our ethos is act justly, love kindness, walk humbly. This should be our time. We should be blazing forth as a countercultural example, and instead, we're leading the charge often of malice and cruelty and division and partisanship, and that is grievous.
There's no way you can look at Jesus and the gospel and put him on the side of greed, on the side of injustice, on the side of wrong. And oftentimes what you end up with is people who are so loud about what God says so little about, and so quiet about what God says so much about.
The Puerto Ricans have a phrase that describes the mindset to struggle against adversity and injustice. It's called La Brega. So it's time for us as Christians to embrace nuestra La Brega. There is a difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is the belief that everything is going to get better. And I am optimistic about things getting better. But hope is the belief that if we fight, if we work, we can make things better. So it's so important that we stay hopeful. On Inauguration Day and Martin Luther King Day, January 20th, 2025, Bishop Booty made a plea to Trump's hardened heart. I found it to be prophetic and humble. Megaland called her a false prophet and made fun of her and scorned her. So did Donald Trump. I had seen actual Christians decry her as having an agenda. And yeah, she may have had her agenda, but her agenda was truth and mercy and peace. Donald Trump's agenda is anger and hate and division. And that is the ultimate difference. So I'm going to end with her plea as a prayer, not just to the president and his administration, but to all of us who say we follow Jesus Christ. Let me make one final plea. Millions of people put their trust in you. And as you told the nation, you have felt the providential hand of a loving God. In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy on the people in our country who are scared now. I ask you to have mercy. Our God teaches us to be merciful to the stranger, for we were all once strangers in this land. May God grant us the strength and courage to honor the dignity of every human being, to speak the truth to one another in love, and walk humbly with each other and our God for the good of all people in this nation and the world. Amen.
Together.